In this video, we are going to recap a movie called Spiderhead. Spoilers ahead. Some bad people are sent to a place called Spiderhead. It is a new kind of jail on a nice island. The bad people get to live well there. They have their own rooms, do some easy work, have fun, and can walk around inside. But they also have to do some tests for the jail people. The tests are about drugs that change how they feel. The bad people have a small box of drugs on their backs. When the jail people want to give them a new drug, they have to say yes first. The boss of the jail people is Steve, and he has a helper named Mark. One day, they give a drug called G46 to Ray. It makes him laugh a lot when Steve tells him silly jokes. Then Mark tells him sad things, but Ray still laughs. Steve is happy with the test, and he puts a gold star on his paper. The next day, Jeff is taken out of the jail with a blindfold for a special test. They give him a drug called N40 before taking off the blindfold, and now Jeff sees everything in front of him as beautiful. Jeff doesn't know how to say it well, so they also give him a drug called B15 to make him talk more. Now Jeff can say how pretty everything looks with nice words from his heart, but when they leave, it turns out Jeff was looking at a dirty place. When Jeff goes back to the jail, he goes to the kitchen to see Lizzie, another bad person he likes. They both have to make food, which is good for them because they can talk, be friends, and tell each other about the tests while they cook. At night, Jeff likes to stay in his room and make very good pictures on a toy. This is not always good because it makes him think about what he did wrong. One night, he went to a party with his best friend Adam and his girlfriend Emma, and Jeff drank too much. Then he and Adam got in a car when they were drunk, and Jeff hit a tree with the car, killing his best friend. For the next test, Jeff is with another bad person named Heather. Steve checks that they never met before and asks if they like each other, but they say not really. But after Mark gives them a drug called N40, Jeff and Heather see each other as very beautiful, and they start kissing and touching right there in front of the cameras and jail people. When they finish, they hug and say, "I love you" to each other. Steve and Mark are happy with the test of N40, but Steve doesn't put a gold star yet because he wants to see if they still love each other later. Later, when Jeff goes around giving food, he gives some to Heather, and it is weird between them. They don't talk at all, so there is no love left like Steve wanted. But he does the test again anyway, and this time Jeff is with Sarah. She is an older woman that Jeff doesn't like at all, but he gets 2 times more N40, and again, Jeff can't stop himself from getting busy with her. Later, Mark is putting more drugs in Jeff's box. He tells him to be careful when he kisses the girls because the box is easy to break, and then they could go crazy. Jeff asks Mark to give him a different work instead of making food, because he has a secret reason. The next day, Jeff is surprised to go to the desk with Steve and Mark for the next test. There are 2 rooms today. In one, there is Dave, who eats a lot of food and then throws up. In the other room, Jeff sees Heather and Sarah. The test is easy. Steve wants Jeff to pick one and give her a drug called Darkenflox, which Steve says makes them angry but not for long. Jeff doesn't like this and says no, but he says that if he had to, it would be random. He doesn't care about either of them. And he says no because he had that drug before and he hated it. This is interesting to Steve because Jeff had different drugs when he kissed them, but he still feels the same. Later, Lizzie comes to Jeff to ask why he changed his work. But they can't talk because the guards come and tell Jeff that today he can go out for a walk and call Emma. But as always, she doesn't answer. He leaves a message saying sorry and that he misses her, like he always does, but this time, Jeff also tells her about Lizzie. For the next test, Jeff is with Rogan, a big mean man. Jeff doesn't like men and is scared that they'll make him kiss Rogan, so he says no to any drug, but nothing happens, and they can go after a few minutes. It's easy to guess why, so Jeff runs to the desk to check. Heather had to give Darkenflox to Jeff or Rogan, and she said no to both. This also means Heather kissed Rogan in one of these tests. Jeff is angry and wants to know if everyone is kissing everyone. And Steve shows him a picture with lines between the bad people. Steve says it's how they have to do the tests, and he doesn't like it either. When Jeff says how bad he feels about these tests, Steve tells him he said yes to them, and the other jail is worse with bad cops. Not wanting to lose what he has here, Jeff says sorry and goes back for another test with Rogan. Luckily, Sarah doesn't give the darkened flocks to any of them either. After the test is done, Steve thinks they'll be ready to put a gold star soon, but Mark is starting to feel bad about it too. Steve tells him this is important work to make the world better, and Mark goes out for his weekend feeling better. Later at night, Steve gives himself some N42. The bad people don't know this, but he has a box of drugs on his back as well. Jeff and Lizzie are eating together, and Jeff tells her how bad darkened flocks makes you feel. Lizzie holds his hand and asks why Jeff changed his work. Jeff says this place makes him confused, and he forgets who he was before, but when he is with her, he feels like himself. The next Monday, Steve wants to try something and asks Mark to give him 3 times more drugs. Jeff comes for the test and sees them do it, but they hide it fast, and Jeff doesn't say anything. For the next test, Steve tells Jeff that they have to keep testing darkened flocks, so Jeff has to give it to Heather. Because of the drugs, Steve is more mean and tells Jeff that Heather is bad and did bad things, and it's better that Jeff does this than Rogan. Jeff says no and asks Steve to talk to the people in charge to stop it. Steve goes out, saying he will call them, but he actually goes to the kitchen to get some coffee and talk to Lizzie for a while. When he comes back, Steve lies to Jeff, saying they said no and Jeff has to do the test or he will lose his good life here. Jeff has no choice, so he gives darkened flocks to Heather, who starts feeling a lot of pain. Mark also gives Jeff B15 to make him talk more. Now Jeff has to say how Heather is scared, how bad he feels, and how he doesn't love her. Heather hits her back on the wall and breaks the box of drugs, and darkened flocks goes all over her. Heather gets very angry, and she breaks a vase and uses the pieces to kill herself before Mark can stop her. Steve runs out to check on her too and drops his keys. While he and Mark fight about what happened, Jeff takes the keys and looks at Steve's things. He finds many things that are interesting. First, there is a name of a drug called OBDX on a paper with Steve's name at the top. This means there are no people in charge. Steve is the boss of everything. Next, Jeff finds a card with numbers and gold stars on it. The numbers are the same as the drugs they test. And 40 doesn't have a star yet because it didn't make real love, and B6 is what Mark puts in everyone's boxes. Before he can look more, Jeff sees Steve coming back and puts everything back, throwing the keys on the floor so Steve doesn't know. Later, Mark asks Steve to tell someone about this, but Steve says no. Telling someone will make them stop everything. And they already did bad things a long time ago, so they can't stop now. Then Steve goes to see Jeff, but nothing he says makes him feel better, so Steve gives him the drug that makes him laugh. Both men laugh a lot, even when Steve says his dad left him when he was little. Jeff asks why Steve never goes out like Mark does, and Steve says he can't because this work is his only love. The next test is for Lizzie, who gets a drug that makes her very scared of everything. She freaks out when she sees a thing that holds papers together. Then she tells Jeff about something bad that happened to her. One night long ago, Jeff drove a car when he was drunk and killed Adam and Emma. He felt very bad since then. Lizzie makes him feel better, and they kiss. Later, Jeff sees them eating together, and he gets an idea. When he looks at the camera and sees Jeff drew Lizzie, Steve knows he is right, and goes to sleep after taking N40 again. The next day, Steve calls Jeff for one more test. He has to give darkened flocks to Lizzie. Jeff says no, and Steve lets him go without doing anything for now. When Jeff is gone, Steve tells Mark to give him 2 times more B6. But when Mark goes to the room, Jeff tells him the truth. He knows Steve is the boss of everything and B6 is not fake. It is the only drug Steve really wants. Mark says he wanted to work with a smart person and make the world better, but he feels bad now too. Jeff sees this, and they make a plan before Mark goes out for the weekend. Jeff sees this, and they make a plan before Mark goes out for the weekend. The next Monday, it's only Steve and Jeff in the room because Mark is sick at home. Jeff has to give darkened flocks to Lizzie, but he still says no, which makes Steve angry. He doesn't get how they can love each other after a few months here, so he makes Lizzie tell Jeff what she did wrong. She left her baby in her car, and the baby died. Lizzie cries a lot, asking Jeff for the drugs, and Jeff pushes the screen. But it's Steve who laughs. Mark lied about being sick and changed the thing so the screen could give drugs to Steve. He also put more B6 in Steve's box. Jeff gives Steve the drug that makes him scared before giving him Darkenflox. As Steve feels a lot of pain, Jeff tells him Mark is coming with the police and that he knows what the real test is. B6 is a drug that makes people do what you want. OBDX means obedience, like obey. Even in pain, Steve thinks B6 could be good for the world. The only reason why they didn't finish yet is that it doesn't make people do everything you want. Steve also says Jeff and Lizzie were free days ago, and he didn't tell them. Jeff is angry and makes Steve use his finger on the screen to open the door so he can go out and tell everyone about Heather. When he goes out, Jeff sees Steve has a knife and tells him to give it to him. But Steve can say no to that even with more B6. The drug isn't strong enough to make people do things they don't want to do. And like Steve said before, this work is his only love, so he will fight for it. Steve hits Jeff and takes the screen to give Lizzie 4 times more Darkenflox, which makes her go crazy. Jeff fights with Steve, making him drop and break the screen. But by pushing him on the wall, he also breaks Steve's box of drugs. The drugs make Steve weak, so Jeff pushes him away, takes the keys and runs to help Lizzie. Luckily, she is still alive. Jeff helps her breathe again, and he also uses the keys to open her box of drugs and take them out. Lizzie says sorry for not telling him what she did before, but Jeff tells her not to worry because he still loves her. They get ready to leave this place, but Steve says something. If the other bad people don't want to lose their good life here, they must stop Jeff and Lizzie. Steve also sees on the cameras that the police are coming, so he takes as many bottles of drugs as he can and leaves too. On their way out, Jeff and Lizzie work together to fight Sarah and Ray. Dave tries to stop them too, but Lizzie gives him the keys to where they keep food. The other bad people are also coming after them fast, but they run faster and get to the last hall, locking the door behind them and leaving them on the other side. When they go outside, Steve is already flying away in his plane, so they take a boat and leave too. Mark is with the police in their boats and watches Steve fly away, but he doesn't have to worry. The N40 makes Steve see everything as pretty instead of a big rock, so he hits his plane on it. Jeff and Lizzie also see the fire and laugh because it's funny how it ended. There's no drug for feeling sorry for yourself,